The track smells like rubber, and August refusing to leave. It is the second week of September, and the sun sits low and mean over Sycamore Ridge Middle School, pressing heat into the backs of 40 kids who have shown up to earn something. They stretch and bounce and eye each other sideways, the way kids do when belonging is still a question. At the center of all of it, Coach Darren Pruitt stands with his stopwatch raised like a gavel not yet swung, and the click of that watch, each time he tests the mechanism, lands in the chest like a small verdict. Kofi Abara is on the infield grass. He has taken his shoes off. This is the first thing you need to understand about him. Removing his shoes is not a statement. It is not defiance or eccentricity or a 14-year-old reaching for attention. It is what his grandfather Kwame taught him on the cracked sidewalks of Columbus, in the grass-stripped parks between apartment buildings, on Sunday mornings when the city was still quiet enough to hear your own footfalls. "Feel the ground first," Kwame would say, crouching beside young Kofi with his big, careful hands. "The ground tells you what your shoes are hiding." Kofi stands now with his eyes closed and his soles pressed into the grass, feeling the slight slope of the infield, the firmness beneath the softness, the earth's feedback traveling up through the arches of his feet like information. On his left wrist, a braided leather cord turns slowly between his fingers. He is not performing calm. He simply has not yet been given a reason to abandon it. Pruitt watches for 30 seconds. That is all. He crosses the infield with the authority of a man who has crossed it 10,000 times and believes that number has made him correct. He stops 3 feet from Kofi, and his voice, when it comes, is not cruel in its tone. That is the particular sophistication of this kind of harm. It is procedural. It is the language of standards. Non-standard warm-up protocol, he says, loudly enough that the nearest cluster of kids goes still. Inadequate footwear, which is to say no footwear, which is a liability issue for this program, and he says Kofi's name wrong, which Kofi does not correct. And then he says he has reviewed the registration form, and there is no verifiable coaching history listed, no club affiliation, no certified trainer. His voice carries the easy confidence of a man who has confused his preferences for principles. The program, Pruitt says, has standards that exist for a reason. The full squad is watching now. 40 kids and the particular silence of 40 kids who sense something is happening that they do not have language for yet. "You'll never succeed on this track, son." He says it that way, plainly, as if it is information rather than a sentence, as if a stopwatch he has not yet raised to Kofi's performance can somehow already contain the result. The words go out into the September air and do not come back. 15 feet away, Tremaine Osei has his phone out before he fully decides to have it out. His thumb finds the record button almost by reflex, the way you reach for something when your body understands before your mind does that this moment should be witnessed. He captures 12 seconds of it, maybe 15, Pruitt's back and Kofi's face and the terrible open geometry of the space between them. Then he pockets the phone and stands very still, not knowing what he is holding. Kofi picks up his shoes. He does not put them back on. He carries them in one hand, laces trailing, and he walks toward the gate at the far end of the track. His chin does not drop. His pace does not quicken into the desperate shuffle of someone fleeing. He walks with a composure that is more devastating than tears would be, because composure in that moment costs something, and everyone watching can feel the cost even if they cannot name it. Some of them look away. That is its own kind of answer. Nadia's car is in the second row of the parking lot, engine running, the air conditioning already on because she knows her son and she knows September. She is still in her scrubs from the tail end of a shift, and when Kofi gets in and pulls the door shut, she looks at his face and does not ask the question forming behind her eyes. He puts his shoes on the floor mat. She pulls out of the lot. The radio comes on for 3 seconds, and she turns it off. The ride home is 11 minutes. Kofi counts them by the leather cord moving through his fingers, the braid worn smooth in the places Kwame's hands once wore it smooth before him. Nadia's hands are steady on the wheel. She has learned, through years of exhaustion and love, when her son needs her words and when he needs her silence. Today, he needs her silence. She gives it to him like a gift. That night, after dinner neither of them finishes, Kofi sits at the kitchen table with his grandfather's journal open in front of him. The cover is dark leather, soft from handling, and it smells faintly of red clay and something mechanical. Oil, maybe, from the workshop where Kwame used to sit and write. The handwriting on the first page moves between English and Twi, the letters pressed deep and sure. The body already knows. The first line reads, "The coach's job is to listen, not to dictate." Kofi reads the page once, then again, then a third time. The house goes quiet around him. At some point, the overhead light is too bright, and he does not remember closing his eyes, only that the journal is still open when his head comes to rest beside it, the page warm under his cheek. His grandfather's handwriting inches from his face like a whisper still in the air. When they say you cannot, they are telling you about themselves, not about you. He sleeps, and the question the night leaves hanging is whether, come morning, he will believe it. 3 weeks is enough time to become invisible. Kofi learned the geometry of it quickly. Eat in the library, not the cafeteria. Take the long hallway past the science wing to reach math class. Never cut through the athletic corridor, where the trophy cases line the walls and Pruitt's framed records hang behind glass like verdicts. He became expert at the particular art of being present without being seen, answering questions in class with the minimum syllables required, finding the chair nearest the door, existing in the margins of rooms the way water finds the lowest corner. If the other kids noticed his disappearance, they did not say so. Disappearing, he was learning, was only remarkable when someone had expected you to stay. Odessa Vance set her lunch tray across from him on a Tuesday. No introduction, no preamble. She looked at him with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who has spent 26 years reading bodies for information they cannot hide, and she asked him one question. "Can I see how you warm up?" Kofi looked up. She was compact and still, silver locks close-cropped, hands wrapped around a thermos. She did not look like she was offering charity. She looked like she was asking for data. 6:30 tomorrow, she said. Back corner of the field, before anyone else arrives. She picked up her tray and left. Kofi watched her go. It was the first time since September that someone at this school had spoken to him as though his answer mattered. The grass was still dark with dew when he arrived the next morning. The sky above the bleachers held the gray blue of not quite dawn, and his breath came in small clouds. He took his shoes off without being asked. Odessa stood 10 feet back with a clipboard and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. He moved through the routine the way Kwame had taught him. Eyes closed at first, feeling the cold ground push information up through his soles, the slight give near the drainage line, the firmer patch where the groundskeeper had receded. Arm circles, slow, the shoulders releasing. Then the high knee walk, deliberate, each footfall placed rather than dropped. Then the rhythm, a tempo his grandfather had taught him by humming it, a cadence that lived somewhere between music and mechanics. His stride opened, his breathing organized itself around the movement like water rearranging around stone. Odessa did not write anything. She watched. When he finished, she asked to see the journal. She sat on the bottom bleacher step and read for 40 minutes. Kofi sat 3 feet away and watched the sun clear the tree line. He could hear pages turning, slow and careful. The way you handle something you understand is fragile. Twice she stopped and went back. Once she held a page up slightly, as if the angle of the light might help her read a diagram more clearly. She did not rush. She gave every page the full weight of her attention, and Kofi understood, watching her, that this was the most seriously anyone connected to this institution had ever taken his grandfather's work. Kwame had never been inside a school like this. He had developed his methods on red dirt roads with no equipment, no credentials, no one's permission. Watching Odessa read, Kofi felt something shift in his chest, a tightness he had carried so long he had stopped noticing it. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Your grandfather," she said, "figured out what sports scientists spent 15 years trying to prove." She set the journal carefully in her lap. Rhythm-based cadence training, minimizing ground contact time, using proprioceptive feedback, what the body learns through barefoot contact with the ground, to self-correct stride efficiency. He didn't have the academic language for it, but the method is exactly right. It is more than exactly right. She paused. It's elegant. Kofi did not trust himself to speak immediately. He looked at the track. The rubber surface caught the early light and gave it back reddish, almost the color of the Ghanaian clay his grandfather had described in the journal's margins. "I'd like to train with you," Odessa said. Early mornings here, using his methods alongside some things I know about load progression. We don't tell Pruitt. We don't tell anyone. She held his gaze. But I write down every time we record, every single one, in my notebook with the date and the conditions. You understand why that might matter later. He did. He nodded once. The leather cord was tight around his wrist, and he pressed 2 fingers against it without thinking, the braid worn smooth in the same places it had been smooth on Kwame's wrist before him. They started the following Monday. The metronome was small and silver, and its tick in the early morning quiet was the only sound besides his breathing and the soft percussion of his feet. Odessa called out split times in a flat, precise voice, not encouraging, not critical, just accurate. Numbers as information, not judgment. The first week, Kofi ran stiffly, his body still braced against being watched. The second week, something loosened. By the 4th week, he stopped thinking about the numbers and started running to the rhythm, the way Kwame had taught him, the way it felt before the tryout had made him self-conscious about every movement he made. The times dropped. Not dramatically at first, seconds, fractions of seconds, but steadily, the way water carves stone. Odessa wrote each one down without comment, her handwriting small and exact, the notebook filling page by page. And somewhere in the 5th week, then the 6th, Kofi's face changed during the runs. The effort was still there, the strain visible in the final straightaway. But underneath it, or perhaps through it, something else appeared. Not performance, not desperation, joy. Clean and uncomplicated, the way his grandfather had always said it should feel. 8 weeks in, Odessa clicked her stopwatch at the end of a full 800-meter effort. She looked at the display. She looked at Kofi, bent at the waist with his hands on his knees, breathing hard. She looked at the stopwatch again. "Kofi," she said quietly, "do you know what the school record is?" He shook his head. She told him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing on the field. The Hargrove Junior Invitational was held on a Saturday morning in mid-September at Carver Park Athletic Complex, a city-owned facility with a regulation 8-lane track, certified timing officials, and a results board that fed directly to the district athletics database. Not glamorous. The bleachers held maybe 200 people, mostly parents with travel mugs and younger siblings who wanted to be somewhere else. But the officials wore sanctioned badges, the timing system was IAAF certified, and every result posted to that board was as real as any result could be. This mattered. Remember it. Kofi stood in lane 4 wearing a plain white singlet and the small braided cord on his left wrist, no school name on his chest. The word beside his registration number on the heat sheet read, "Independent." He pressed 2 fingers against the cord and felt the smooth worn places and thought of nothing except the rhythm. 180 beats per minute. The metronome's tick, internalized over 8 weeks until it lived in the space behind his sternum. The gun cracked. He didn't go out fast. That was the first thing the watching coaches noticed. The boy in lane 4 held back through the opening 200 meters while others surged, and there was something almost unhurried in his movement, a cadence that looked easy. The way difficult things look easy when they have been practiced into the body. High knee drive, relaxed shoulders, minimal ground contact, each foot landing and releasing like a thought completed and set aside. The leather cord flickered at his wrist. Kwame had written in the journal's 3rd page, "The first lap is a conversation with your body. The second lap is what you say when you stop being afraid to speak." At 400 meters, Kofi was 3rd. At 500, he was 2nd, and the gap ahead of him had stopped growing. The final 200 meters, he ran like something released, not desperate, purposeful, the acceleration smooth and inevitable, his form holding clean through the final turn while the boy ahead of him began to tighten, shoulders rising, stride shortening under the weight of accumulated lactic acid. Kofi did not tighten. He had run this moment 100 times in the pre-dawn gray, Odessa's voice flat and precise behind him, and his body knew what to do. He crossed the line first, 4 seconds ahead of second place. Not a photo finish, not a lean, 4 full seconds. A margin that in an 800-meter race at the junior level is the kind of number that makes officials check the timing equipment. A murmur moved through the bleachers, low and collective. the specific sound of people recalibrating what they thought they'd seen. A woman 3 rows up said quietly, but not quietly enough, "Who is that kid?" The results board updated at 11:47 a.m., lane 4, Abara, K. Independent. The time sat there in black digits, factual and immovable, fed automatically into the district athletics database where it would remain regardless of what anyone wanted to do about it. 48 hours later, Darren Pruitt found it. He was at his desk on Monday morning when the automated athletics digest hit his inbox the way it did every week. He almost scrolled past it. Then the number stopped him. He read it twice. He pulled up the full results page and read it a third time, and something moved across his face that was not quite an expression, more like the moment before an expression, the instant of processing that precedes the decision about how to feel. He picked up his phone and set it down. He picked it up again. Then he opened a new document and began to type, and the typing was slow and deliberate, the way a man types when he is choosing every word carefully because he knows the words will be read by people with authority over him. The letter arrived at the district athletic office by end of day Tuesday. It was 4 paragraphs long, formatted on school letterhead, and it read as follows: that one Kofi Abara, listed as an independent competitor at the Hargrove Junior Invitational, had produced a time statistically implausible for an uncoached athlete of his age and experience, that there were reasonable grounds to question whether said athlete had falsified his registration materials, that the timing equipment used at the Carver Park facility should be reviewed for calibration accuracy, and that the district, in the interest of maintaining competitive integrity, ought to investigate before allowing this athlete to compete in any sanctioned meet. The letter used the word integrity 4 times. It used the word protocol 3 times. It did not once use Kofi's name after the first sentence. It referred to him, in each subsequent instance, as the athlete in question. That is what erasure looks like when it wears a suit. Nadia received the forwarded letter from the district office on Wednesday evening. She was still in her scrubs, 12 hours of a hospital shift sitting in her bones, and she read it standing at the kitchen counter because she had not yet had the energy to sit. Kwame's journal was open beside her. She had taken to leaving it there, the way some people leave a photograph. She read the letter once, then she sat down, slowly, and read it again. A stillness came into her that was not calm. It was the stillness of something gathering, pressure finding its shape. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She picked up her phone and called Odessa Vance. Odessa answered on the second ring. "I know," she said. "I've already called someone." 30 minutes later, Odessa's car was in the driveway. She came through the door with her own notebook under one arm, 8 weeks of training logs, session times, documented progression, and a folder thick with printed pages. She set everything on the kitchen table next to the complaint letter and next to Kwame's journal. 3 documents, 3 kinds of evidence. She looked at Nadia. She looked at Kofi, who had come quietly to the doorway. "They wanted documentation," Odessa said. "Let's give them documentation." The conference room on the 3rd floor of the district administrative building was the kind of room that had never been designed for children. The table was long and dark-grained, the chairs high-backed and unyielding, the fluorescent panels overhead casting the particular flat light that makes everyone look slightly unwell. 3 administrators sat on one side. The district head of athletics, a broad man named Gerald Holt, sat at the head. Beside him, a woman with a university lanyard and a laptop open to a spreadsheet, the neutral consultant, Dr. Priya Shenoy, brought in from the regional sports science department. Pruitt sat apart from them, at the corner, his stopwatch on the table in front of him like a statement. Kofi sat between his mother and Odessa. He kept his left hand in his lap, thumb running along the braided leather cord at his wrist. Felice Drummond sat at the end nearest the door, her briefcase already open, her expression the practiced calm of someone who has won arguments in worse rooms than this. Odessa presented first. She didn't rush. She placed a bound copy of her training log in front of each panel member, 8 weeks of sessions, every entry dated, timed, and annotated. She walked them through it the way a scientist walks through a methodology. Here's the baseline assessment. Here's the progression. Here's the split data from week 1 against the split data from week 8. She cited 2 published studies on rhythm-based interval training. She referenced the biomechanical principles underlying the method, tracing them to documented East African coaching traditions, and with particular care to the handwritten journal of Kofi Abara, which she had transcribed into an appendix. She did not editorialize. She let the numbers carry the argument, because numbers were the language the room had been built to hear. Then Felice stood. She placed 4 folders on the table. 4 athletes, 12 years. She read their names aloud, slowly, giving each one the weight it deserved. She read the language from each dismissal record, the procedural phrases, the citations of form and liability and protocol. She laid the documents side by side and let the panel read the pattern themselves, because a pattern you discover yourself is harder to dismiss than one you are handed. The room was very quiet. Dr. Shinoy spoke next. She had reviewed the invitational footage and Odessa's training data independently, she said. Her assessment was technical, precise, and brief. Given the documented progression across 8 weeks, given the methodology's established biomechanical efficiency, the posted time of 2 minutes and 4 seconds was not anomalous. It was, in fact, consistent with the trajectory of the data. She used the word predictable. Then she closed her laptop. Holt looked at Pruitt. "Coach, your response." Pruitt had been still for most of the preceding hour. Now he straightened. "The method is unorthodox," he said. "Whatever the trainer documented, it falls outside established coaching curriculum. That's not bias, that's standard. You can't build a program on informal techniques developed outside sanctioned training frameworks." He glanced at the journal appendix in front of him and did not touch it. And Ms. Vance overstepped her role. Her position is athletic trainer, not coach, not program director. He kept going. The invitational results, he said, could not be applied to school records. The timing equipment at Carver Park had not been certified under district protocol. The complaint stood on procedural grounds regardless of the data being presented, because the data itself had been gathered outside sanctioned conditions. The panel went very still. Not the stillness of agreement, the stillness of people listening to someone who does not know he is already lost. Gerald Holt set down his pen. "Coach Pruitt," he said, "in 19 years, have you ever timed this athlete?" The question sat in the room like something solid. Pruitt opened his mouth, closed it. His hand moved almost involuntarily toward the stopwatch on the table, and stopped. He had no answer, not a procedural one, not any kind. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Kofi counted them. Holt looked at the panel, a short exchange, voices low. Then he folded his hands on the table and spoke directly to Kofi for the first time since the review began. "Kofi, you are reinstated to the Sycamore Ridge track program, effective immediately. You are eligible to compete in the district championship meet this Friday. The complaint filed against your invitational results is dismissed." Kofi did not move for a moment. Then he felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, warm, steady, the same hand that had been straight-spined through 12-hour shifts in district letters and every room that had tried to make her feel small. He looked down at the leather cord on his wrist. He thought of red dirt roads. He thought of a man who had written on the first page of a worn journal, "The body already knows." He exhaled. In the hallway outside the conference room, Tremaine Osei had been sitting on a bench for 90 minutes, elbows on knees, phone in hand. He heard the door open. He saw Kofi's face. He didn't need to hear the words. He looked down at his phone, at the video he had been carrying for 2 months, 14 seconds of footage, a track, a boy who hadn't even run yet, and a coach's voice saying what it said. He pressed post. The video went live at 4:17 p.m. By 6:00 p.m., it had 40,000 views. By midnight, 800,000. Pruitt's words, "You'll never succeed on this track, son," were now a caption being shared by people who had never heard of Sycamore Ridge, by people who recognized the voice, who had heard it in different rooms wearing different faces. The district championship meet was in 4 days. The track smelled of rubber and September heat, that particular scorch of sun on synthetic surface that Kofi had come to know as the smell of mornings that change things. By 9 o'clock, the stands were already 2/3 full. Local journalists occupied the press row with their lanyards and their recording equipment. A dozen phones were already raised at recording angle, their owners not yet sure what they were waiting for, but certain they would know it when it arrived. The school's social media stream was live. A banner at the top of the screen read, "District Championship Meet." Below it, in smaller text, someone had typed the record, 800 meters, 158.4, set 1994. The number had been there for 30 years. Everyone at Sycamore Ridge knew whose number it was. Darren Pruitt sat in the fourth row of the east side bleachers in a gray zip-up and civilian shoes. No whistle, no clipboard, no stopwatch around his neck. That detail struck more than one person who noticed him there, the absence of it like a missing limb. He sat very still, hands on his knees, watching the infield with the fixed attention of a man who has nothing left to do but watch it. The administrative review was ongoing. His position was suspended pending outcome. He was here as a spectator, which was the only thing in 19 years he had never been. On the infield grass, Kofi Abara took off his shoes. He set them beside his bag with the same care he always had, the same care he'd used that first morning at tryouts 2 months ago, in the same September light, on the same grass. Nobody said anything. A few heads turned, a few phones shifted. He pressed his bare soles into the turf, closed his eyes, and breathed the way Kwame had taught him. In through the nose, slow, until you feel the ground push back. The ground always pushes back. That is the whole point. He moved through the warm-up sequence from memory, the high knee lifts, the ankle circles, the rhythm bounces, each movement unhurried and unashamed, public for the first time in a way that felt less like performance and more like return. Odessa Vance stood at the infield edge with her arms folded and her thermos tucked under one elbow. She watched him and said nothing. She had said everything she needed to say at 5:45 that morning. In the stands, Nadia Ibarra sat with Kwame's journal open across her lap. She was not reading it. She was holding it the way you hold something that belongs to someone who is gone. Tremaine found Kofi near the warm-up line, 8 minutes before the 800-meter heat. He was in his race kit, number pinned, hands moving the way they always did when he was nervous. He stopped in front of Kofi and looked at him directly, which cost him something. "I should have posted it the same day," he said. "I'm sorry it took me this long." 6 words that weren't enough and were exactly enough. Kofi nodded once. Tremaine nodded back. They didn't need more than that. The starter called the 800-meter field to the line. Kofi settled into lane 3, 7 other runners. The crowd noise dropped by half without anyone deciding to let it. He looked down the first straight, then closed his eyes for one breath. He touched the leather cord on his wrist. He heard, from somewhere in the part of his mind that kept Kwame alive, a single word in Twi that meant, "Begin." The gun cracked. He ran the first lap the way Odessa had built it, controlled, internal, tucked just off the shoulder of the lead pack. His stride was high and loose, that particular rhythm that looked unhurried until you watched the gap it made. 200 meters, 300. The pack jockeyed. Kofi held his line. 400 meters, the bell lap, and he was sitting in third, exactly where the plan put him. His breathing even, his arms low and relaxed, his feet finding the track the way water finds a groove. Then the back straight of lap 2 opened ahead of him. Something shifted. It wasn't visible at first. It was felt. The crowd registered it before they understood it, a change in the quality of the air around lane 3, a sense that the geometry of the race had been quietly rearranged. Kofi did not surge. He simply stopped holding back. His knee drive lifted. His arms found the rhythm Kwame had tapped on his shoulders in a city park 3 years ago. 1-2, 1-2, the cadence that lived in his bones before it ever lived in a journal. He came off the back straight and into the final curve, and he was no longer racing the field. He was running the way he ran in the early gray mornings on cold grass, the way he ran when nobody was watching and the only sound was the metronome and his own breath. He was running for a man who had written, on the first page of a worn journal, "The body already knows." He hit the final straight and the crowd was on its feet, and he crossed the finish line and the clock stopped. 1:57.1, 3 seconds. The stadium held them. A full 3 seconds of silence so complete you could hear the flag rope tapping its pole in the September wind. Then it broke. The sound came up from the bleachers like something physical. Odessa's fist went into the air, one sharp motion, controlled even in joy. Nadia was standing, the journal pressed flat against her chest with both hands, her face open in a way that had nothing left to protect. Tremaine was shouting something nobody could hear over the noise, and Pruitt sat very still in the fourth row. His face was pale. His hands had not moved from his knees. On the infield scoreboard, his number had been replaced by another. 12 phones were already pointed at him, already uploading, already sending his expression, disbelief collapsing inward toward something raw, something that looked, for the first time, like recognition, out into a world that was waiting to receive it. 6 months later, the door to Pruitt's office was closed and dark, the nameplate removed, a rectangle of slightly less faded paint marking where it had been. Odessa's name was on a new door down the hall, a proper placard this time, not a taped index card. Director of Inclusive Athletic Development, Sycamore Ridge Unified School District. The framed photograph in the gymnasium was new. It showed a boy in mid-stride, crossing a finish line, his arms not raised in triumph but simply open, as if receiving something. The old record plaque was gone. Nobody had announced its removal. One morning it was there, and the next it was not, and the space on the wall where it had hung was filled with a photograph of a 14-year-old boy who ran the way his grandfather had taught him on the red dirt roads of another country. The administrative review had taken 11 weeks. The report was 43 pages. It documented a 12-year pattern of procedural exclusions that fell, with a consistency that could not be explained by chance, along racial lines. 3 families, 7 athletes, the same language each time, form, protocol, proper technique. Pruitt was not called a racist in the report. The report did not need to use that word. The pattern spoke with a precision that no single word could match. He was removed from his head coaching position, his contract not renewed. The district commissioned an independent audit of all its athletic programs. These were not small things. They were also not enough, and the story knew that and did not pretend otherwise. Accountability is not the same as justice. It is a beginning, if you are lucky. It is the door opening, not the room already changed. Odessa had spent her first week in her new office unpacking a box of peer-reviewed papers she had been collecting for 9 years, waiting for the authority to act on them. She had that authority now. The research went into a curriculum binder. The curriculum binder became a district document. The district document had a name because Kofi had made that a condition, stated quietly and without negotiation in the room where adults twice his age were deciding how to proceed. He had looked at the committee chair and said, "My grandfather's name goes on it, not a method, not a framework, his name." The Kofi Abara rhythm training method was formally integrated into the district's coaching curriculum the following month. In the acknowledgement section, Kwame's full name appeared, followed by a single line in Twi that Kofi had written out by hand and refused to translate for the committee. It meant, "The body already knows." The gymnasium held 400 students on a Thursday morning in March. The bleachers were full. Teachers stood along the walls. A camera on a tripod fed a live stream that had, over the past 2 hours, grown to 60,000 viewers. Kofi stood at the podium wearing his school clothes and the leather cord on his left wrist, and he held his grandfather's journal with both hands, the way his mother had held it at the finish line. He didn't start with the record. He started with the morning he was cut from tryouts. He described the feeling of walking off the track with the eyes of an entire squad on his back. He said, "I believed him. Not for long, but for long enough. I want you to know that. I believed him, and I went home, and I sat on the floor of my room, and I thought, maybe the way I run is wrong. Maybe I am wrong." He paused. 400 students were very quiet. He said, "My grandfather spent his whole life developing a training method that nobody with credentials ever validated. He did it on roads that weren't paved, with no equipment, no stopwatch, no institution behind him. He did it because he understood something that took me 14 years and 1 very bad day to understand. That the body already knows. That the job of a teacher is to listen to what the body is already doing and help it do that better. Not to replace it, not to correct it into someone else's shape." He talked about Odessa. He said she risked something real, and he wanted everyone to know that, because people who risk real things for other people's children deserve to be named out loud. He talked about Tremaine, who was in the bleachers and looked at the floor when Kofi said his name, and then looked up. He talked about his mother, who was standing against the wall near the door with her arms crossed and her face doing the thing it did when she was trying not to cry in public. Then he looked directly into the camera. Not at the gymnasium, into the lens. He said, "If you are watching this, and someone has told you that your method is wrong, that your form is wrong, that your body is wrong, that you are wrong, I am talking to you. I'm not talking about running. I'm talking about every room you have ever walked into and been told you did not belong. My grandfather never walked into a room like that and left believing them. I'm trying to learn how to do the same." He closed the journal. The leather cord caught the gymnasium light, worn smooth from years of being touched by 2 sets of hands across 2 continents. He said, "The body already knows." He was right, and so are you.